What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 149 of the FlipScreen Games Podcast, a weekly video game podcast where a few best buds from different nations come together to discuss the wide world of video games. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined, as always, my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Max Wright.
Ahoy, ahoy, everybody! What a lovely summer's day it's been today. Only rained 3 times. We're in. We're back.
I'll tell you what, we are having the opposite experience on my side of the pond where I am praying for rain because it
Oh,
is like 98 degrees Fahrenheit and very humid. So
there's
let's
something
get a
about.
thunderstorm, please.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think I've had enough of the rain now. But there's always a thing of like, my birthday's in July, and every year, like when I was a kid, I was like, oh yeah, it's hot and it's sunny. Whereas now, it's my 30th last year. We hired out like a little venue with a garden and all that, and it rained so hard all day. We were all just trapped inside this venue. My girlfriend took me hiking for the weekend. She booked all this outdoor stuff, pissed it down the entire time. There's just no rhyme nor reason to it. But yeah.
So, what there is a rhyme or reason to is how we approach our backlogs, Max, which is what
Mhm.
we're going to talk about here today. We got a question from LD Link 16 over on the Discord that I thought was so good. I wanted to make it our main topic for today. LD Link 16 wrote in and just like you can and said, "Longtime listener here, first time writing in with a question." Well, hey, thanks for writing in, Link. Appreciate it.
Hello.
Really nice to hear from you. And of course, any of you longtime listeners haven't yet written into the show, we'd love to hear from you. So please do. As gamers, I think it's safe to say every one of us has a backlog of games they still want to finish or even start. Have any of you ever tried to make a serious dent in your own backlog in any sort of organized way? Perhaps tracking your progress with a spreadsheet or an app? Any success or failure stories related to this? I'm currently making an attempt at this myself, and while I did finish quite some games, quite some games that I'm sure. Okay, well, I did finish quite a few games, I'll say, that I'm sure I wouldn't have otherwise. My biggest problem is that I keep adding new games to the list. So it keeps growing rather than shrinking. Any recommendations you have would be greatly appreciated.
So this came up last week, and I was raring to go, but we didn't have enough time. There is an app or a website that is also an app that I use. The link is ggapp.io. I'll get Pete to post that in the description. I use it. A few of my friends use it. It's just a very good way of organizing, the games you're playing, also lists of games. I've got lists on here for every game I beat. I chuck on a list for the year because, when it gets to the end of the year and we're doing game of the year conversations, it's nice to know what I've played, so I can go like, oh yeah, I did play that, I did really like that. Oh, I forgot that was this year, that kind of thing. But also, in the spirit of this question, very often will have a moment where I'm like, okay, I've played too much new stuff. Let's see what I've got, and I'll go on like, weird winding routes through older games and games I haven't played yet, or games I started that I want to go back to, and things like that. And I use GG for most of that. So if you're looking for like a good visual way, because it's all this sort of nice image art, you can look at, like all of your list is like a big block of games. It's quite nice at the end of the year just to have a visual representation of what have you played, or what are you yet to play, which I find easier than like a list or a spreadsheet or something like that. So that's what I use. What about you, Pete?
So I actually had a period where I used the GG app as well. I kind
Mhm.
of fell off of it, coming off of one of our like, there was a point coming off of a year I had used it, maybe I guess 2 years ago now, and I just didn't get back in the habit, and ever since then I've been a little bit more by the seat of my pants. But I think the way that I generally go about it is, and a bunch of you wrote in with some of your strategies that we'll get to in a little bit. But I think that the way that I always try to think about it is like, what are the games that are coming out in a given year, right? That I know I want to play because
Mhm.
we talk about this kind of at the beginning of the year where there's always like that. Like let's take a look at the calendar, and there are certain games that are like, this is a day one buy for me. There's no way I'm going to miss this one at launch. I want to be part of the conversation. I want to be leading the conversation here. Um, and I kind of try to create like a bit of a mental map of like, okay, these are the games that are must plays that I need to plan my time around, right? Because I know I want to sink time in with them, and I try to have an idea of how long that they're going to take me roughly, right?
Mhm.
And then kind of any time in between those releases, right, that isn't theoretically being dedicated to one of those experiences. I kind of have some opportunity there to like jump back into something from the backlog, right?
Yeah.
And I think the way that I kind of try to prioritize what's next is very, very like based on mood. Because, I think ultimately, like, while there are certain games on my backlog that I do feel like, oh, I wanna get to this game because, I feel like I'm maybe missing some historical context, or, like, this is this franchise that I really love and I wanna go back and play an older entry that I've never tried before or something
Yeah.
like that, right? Or maybe there's like a key game that I wanna replay, right? Maybe there's a new entry in a series that I really like that's coming out, and I wanna replay one of the older entries or something like that to
Get
kinda
you
get
back
in
in the
that.
mood.
Exactly. So
Mm.
I try to, kind of keep those things in mind, right? Where like if I'm in the mood for something, that's like action oriented, right? But I happen to have a big RPG on my backlog, I'm not going to just jump to that one because, oh, I should play this game, right? I think as soon as you
Yeah.
get into that, I should be playing this mentality, you're getting away from the point of the hobby, and also
Yeah.
you're diminishing the likelihood that you're going to enjoy the game or finish it, right? And then that kind of defeats the purpose.
There are games that I've picked up at launch, and for one reason or another, maybe I've just sort of not been in the mood to play anything, or I've burnt myself out or something, and I'll start playing it and just like this isn't grabbing me. And I know that if I force myself to play it, the experience isn't going to be there. Big example for me, Near Replicant came out, and I picked up. I'm a huge fan of Near Automata. Started playing this, and while I could tell that the game was obviously very good, for me personally at the time, I was just like, I don't want to play any games right now, and I'm really forcing it because I've paid for it and it's just come out. I never got back to that. I ended up trading it in, but this week I've been eyeing it up on Steam because it's on sale at the moment, and I'm like, well, maybe now's the time. I'm playing more actiony
The
stuff.
mood striking.
The mood is striking, and I know that there's a lot coming out in sort of like September and towards the end of the year. But now I'm like, okay, maybe now's the time that I pick this game back up on the Steam Deck in a more comfortable, where I'm more comfortable playing and I have more sort of options to do. So maybe now's the time to play. And there's a few games like that where I'll like it's like a something I started and it's like a gap. And honestly, the Steam Deck's been great for that. Of being like, oh, I
Oh
should
yeah.
pick
The
that
Steam
up and
Deck's
I'll
huge for that.
Yeah, yeah, I'll just quickly burst through that. And there are games that like Dark Souls Remastered that I recently played because I finished Shadow of the Erdtree. I was like, oh, I want to play more of this, but I'll go back to the beginning. Let's play Dark Souls Remastered. It's a game I played before. So it was a replay. I bought it on the Steam Deck, like I say. I was able to slam through that in like less than a week because I was able
Mhm.
to just pick it up and do a little bit here and there, a little bit here and there, which is how I played the original on the Switch. That's the first time I ever played it. Um, but it is, it's nice to be able to have games where I can dip in and out and I can sort of make chunks in them. Um, and most of this year so far has been spent doing reviews for the channel and playing new stuff that's been coming out, sort of trying to keep on top of that. But we've had a bit of a lull. I've been unfortunately buying other games as well to supplement that because of the summer sale. Which, oh well, what am I to do? Do you find yourself buying things for the backlog, or do you hold off because you're like, I'm not going to have time for that yet?
It really depends. I'm certainly guilty of that. We all are. We actually got a comment here from Steve's dad, Andy Rads, who said, "For what it's worth, I bought games that I've still not played. I tend to go through cycles of game playing and then time away from it. When I get the gaming itch, I dive into one of the games waiting on my shelf." That experience for me is very hit or miss because I've definitely been guilty of being the person who picks up a game on the Steam sale or on on Switch or whatever on a platform I haven't played it on before, right? But a game that I know I've played through. Like a great example is like I just bought the Mass Effect Legendary Collection
Of
on
course, you
Steam
have.
because it was $5, right? And I
Yeah.
was like, there's no universe that I'm not going to play this again for
Hmm.
$5. I may as well snag it and throw it in the backlog for whenever I'm
Impossible to
ready
pass
for a
that.
replay, right?
Yeah.
Great. No problem. Where that gets dicier for me is games that are not that. If it's not a game I know I already love that I'm getting for like dirt cheap, I'm less likely to do that now unless I'm ready to get into it because
Hmm.
I've found that I often will do that where I'll buy the game and be like, I'll make time for this. And then I just never do. And I have
Yeah.
plenty of games that were games that, again, to take it back to that kind of the barometer of interest that I have, right? Where there are games that are like, this is a 9 out of 10, this is a 10 out of 10. I must play this game at some point. And then there are others that are like, oh, I'm interested in this if the mood strikes or if I hear that it's really good or whatever. And those games are always the games that end up just burning a hole in my pocket, right? Like
Yeah.
Steve has been razzing me for years now that I bought a copy of Hitman because he wanted me to
Mhm.
play it, not because I was super interested in it. And again, not that I'm not interested in it, but it's like a 7 out of 10 on my interest level, not an 8 or a 9, right?
Same with Elden Ring, where you bought that and, you got a little bit of the way and didn't get much further, you know?
And it was, yeah, it's kind of just like, all right, like this, I kind of knew that this was maybe not the game for me, but I rolled the dice on it anyway, right?
Yeah.
And that was
I've did the
contemporary,
same.
right? So
Yeah.
like that was a thing where I'll do that sometimes with games that I'm not sure about, and then like I fall in love with it. And it's, and I end up, biting. And that's why I try to step outside my comfort zone, like when those opportunities arise. But like a great example of a recent game was that I picked up Like a Dragon, right? Which like
Yeah.
I want to play, but I have no time to I don't have a plan to play it. So it's
Mhm.
like, who knows when I'm ever gonna get around or if I'll ever get around to it, right? Who knows?
Yeah.
So I try to keep that in mind, right? Because like I have two games that I recently checked off the backlog, or one that I guess I'm in the middle of checking off the backlog. And yeah, they're both games that are 10 years old that I finally got around to for whatever reason, right?
Tell us about them.
One of them was Fallout 4. I've
Yeah.
mentioned that like a little bit here and there where, basically what happened to me there was that the television show came out. I started watching it with my wife and I was more interested in it than she was. So it was kind of like, we'd sit down and be like, "Oh, do you feel like watching another one? Maybe next, maybe next time, whatever." And I was kind of getting the itch to be like, "Oh, I want to spend more time in this world." And I've always been fascinated by the world of Fallout, even though I've never really had an experience where it really clicked,
Yeah.
and for whatever reason, like this was the one, where like I
Mhm.
started it, I was in the mood, I got enough of the way in where I kind of caught up to where I was in my initial playthrough back in the day, like maybe 20 hours in or something like that. And yeah, and it was just working for me. And there wasn't anything else that was, like scratching the itch in the same way. And I even started a couple new games that I liked that I plan to get back to maybe, but they just
Because of playing Fallout, you mean?
yeah,
Or
just because I was
yeah?
more interested in playing Fallout at the time,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, with you now. Yeah.
and that's something I've tried to allow myself to do more in recent years, and I know longtime listeners will remember it was like the year Elden Ring came out, I think, right? Um, I was replaying the Dragon Age series, right? And it's just like there was no reason for me to do that aside from the fact that it's one of my favorite franchises.
Mhm.
I was in the mood to play it, so I played it, right? And that's the game I'm working on now. I'm playing Inquisition, which is the third game in that series, and that one is I've only played once when it came out 10 years ago, and I like 100%ed it and kind of burnt
Game of
myself
the
out
year
on it.
2014.
It was. And so it's one that I've been meaning to replay ever since I played it the first time. It's the only game in the franchise I haven't played more than once. And, the new one's coming out, and I'm in a point right now where there's a gap and I'm in the mood because I've been reading about the lore and getting
Mhm.
excited and kind of inundating myself in that world again. So it just felt like the right time, and it's scratching that itch for me. So that's I think I always try to have that be the guiding principle where like if I'm in the mood for, a, really tough action game, right? Or if I'm in the mood for a very story driven experience, or like if I'm not in the mood for anything, then a lot of times I'll be like, what's the shortest game on my list?
Yes, I do the same. I've got the How Long to Beat plugin on Steam Deck. So if I'm like, oh, look through
Yeah.
my to-do list, I reckon I've got a good weekend here. I can do like a 10-hour game or something like that. And I'll pick a game and I'll go, right, that's about 10 hours long. Cool. I'll give that one a go. And I'll be able to sort of play through that and sort of use that to, give me the information I need, I guess.
That's usually how I end up getting through the indies that are on my backlog. It'll be like, like I had that with was this last year or earlier this year? I can't remember.
What's
Thirsty
that?
Suitors though. I played which
Last year,
is
maybe?
I think it was last year. I can't quite remember. But it's a really unique turn-based RPG indie game that like I had read about and it sounded like it was up my alley. Um and it was just like I hit a point where I was like, damn, like I'm kind of in between things, like I have like a few games that I started that I haven't finished that,
Mhm.
I want to, but I don't really want to jump back into a game that I'm in the middle of right now. And, it just sometimes nothing is hitting right, and like that was one where I was like, it's on Game Pass. I knew I wanted to play this one. Let me boot it up and just see if I like it. Right. And that's what I did with Fallout. I wasn't in the mood for anything, but I was like, why not? And I booted it up
Yeah, maybe
and it
now's the
hit.
time, Yeah, sometimes it does, sometimes it does. Have you got, like, any white whale games? Have you got any games where, like, you've bought it, maybe you paid full price, maybe you got it on a steep discount, but it's one of those ones you're like, "Oh, I need to get to that, I need to get to that." And
Baldur's
I
Gate
wonder if
3.
I was just gonna say, I wonder if ours is the same. I'm looking at it
Yeah.
right now in my Steam. I won't uninstall it. I won't boot it up. It's one of those ones that every time I think about it, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I'd really like to get into that." And I remember Christmas time, I had that week off, around Christmas,
Uh-huh.
and I was like, "Now's the time I'm gonna play Baldur's Gate." And I think a mate of mine came on co-op, and, that was the first experience. It was him sort of dragging me through, and I just wasn't, like, picking up the controls properly, and I swapped between controller and mouse and keyboard, so I kept forgetting what I was doing, and I was like, "Do you know what? I'll do something else."
That one is like makes me upset because honestly, I think I screwed myself over. I think in retrospect, I just shouldn't have gotten it on PC. I wanted to play it on Steam Deck, even though I knew that it didn't run super well.
Yeah.
And I hit a point where I was, getting to the end of the first chapter, and I was like, man, I really like this. And I feel like I'm not getting the whole experience, and that like
Yeah.
I'm kind of playing it in a way that doesn't maybe do it justice, and like I want to jump on, a bigger screen or whatever. So now I'm in this place of like, do I play it on my gaming PC and commit to it being an at my desk game, or do I
Stream it.
buy a second copy? And yeah, I guess I could do that.
Moonlight it. That's
Um,
how I was planning on playing. I've got it installed on the Steam Deck just in case. I think I might have installed it actually this week to make room for something else. But I had it on my Steam Deck, and it's still installed on Steam right now. And I know that I can just boot into it if
yeah.
the mood strikes. And I don't see that happening anytime soon because I've got things I want to play, things that are coming out. There's a lot happening. But it's one of those games that all year I keep thinking, oh yeah, I need to play that. There are games I've given up on. Hi-Fi Rush I uninstalled. I thought there's no way I'm going back to
Yeah,
that
that
now.
was
I'd
one
have
that
to
was on my
really
backlog for a
learn
really
it.
long time too, and I finally uninstalled it just because I feel like I kind of this is an experience I have sometimes too, and I think it's just like part of being like a tastemaker a little bit, which, I know we joke about that, but
We
literally,
do.
right? Like if you're somebody that wants to take in a lot of experiences, like you have to accept that there's a finite amount of time. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes, I've had this happen with TV shows a lot, right? Where it's like you might watch a season or something and you're like, that was good, right? Like I enjoyed what I played of Hi-Fi Rush, but when I set it down, I never felt motivated to go back to it beyond feeling like I should.
Yeah,
And
that is a point for me where I generally generally either stop playing or I see, like, how close am I to the end. And if it's like, "Oh, okay, I'm almost done with it, I'll do it." But there are games that I pick up and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I'm playing this. I should probably, get to the end of this." There are a few of those last year. Whereas, just as an example of something I've sort of picked up and started playing off my backlog, Armored Core 6, which came out last year, and,
I saw
a
you
big
tweeting
fan of
about
all
that.
the From Software games, really big fan of all of all of their combat and all that sort of stuff. And I was like, "Oh, I don't know if this one's gonna be for me though, because it's sort of more level based," and that's what put me off of, like, Bayonetta 3 and Hi-Fi Rush was I feel like I've moved on in terms of how I like my action games. I like there to be more around it than just you join a level, do some fighting, get to the end of the level ends, right? So I was worried that Armored Core wouldn't be that, and that it'd be one of those games where I get a few levels in, just like Bayonetta and Hi-Fi Rush, and I'm like, the idea of going in and doing a level and sitting down for a full could be a half an hour, could be an hour long level where I can't really come out of it. I'm sort of stuck in that. Didn't really do it for me. But I started up Armored Core anyway, and I it was when I was sort of like I'd finished playing my first sort of few missions, and I was laying in bed, and I was like, "Oh, I wonder if I really fancy, like, looking on the Reddit, seeing what people's builds are like,
Yep.
looking up some of the lore and stuff like that." And I was like, "Okay, it's got me," And I know a game's got me when I'm thinking about it, and that is where I will then put the effort in and play it, right? I was thinking a lot about Dark Souls while I was playing that. I was constantly thinking
Oh,
about Elden
dude.
Ring and all the things I
I
could do when I was playing that earlier this year, last
so
month even.
It's so funny. So I went on vacation a couple weeks ago, and
Mhm.
I brought my Xbox with me because I knew we were going to be there for like a week, and it was like a beach hang kind of trip with a bunch of friends. So I was like, oh, surely there will be times where I'm the only one that's awake or whatever, right?
Mhm.
So perfect time to like put some more time into Fallout. and I ended up finishing it while I was there. And when I was like on the ride home, it was like it was a decently long drive, and there was like a point where sometimes you're in the car for a while, and it's like there's like the conversation reaches a natural pause, and you're kind of just like sitting. And I was just like on my phone, and Sarah's like, "Oh, what are you like looking at?" And I was like, "I'm just reading the Fallout wiki. I'm just reading like lore about games I haven't played and parts of the
Yeah.
map and stuff like that, which is always something that I'm a huge sucker for. And yeah, that's always the thing that I call it the pull, right? And it's like there are plenty of games I've played and enjoyed where that doesn't totally happen, or like I'm just not in that headspace and I'm not constantly thinking about it. But
Yeah.
when I sit down, the game is engaging enough that I'm just back in it. But that's always what I'm chasing, right? Is like the pull, is like wanting
Yeah.
to feel extremely excited about whatever I'm playing. And it's definitely something I've dealt with a little bit of like conflicted feelings about sometimes with like our shows, because like, you know, we've had people writing in asking about certain games, and it's like it would be great if I could have an opinion on every game that people want to hear my opinion about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, transparently, part of it is just needing to go with what I'm feeling, and then the other part of it is that like, I can't buy every single game that comes out or every game that I want to try. So like
Yeah.
you have to get picky sometimes. And like especially when it's like, all right, like money's a little tight this month. Do I want to spend $70 on a game that I might not like, or should I go back and play this game that I already own, or that, I started and I never finished or whatever, right? And like see if you can get, that extra value out of it.
I feel like this year, if I really, really think about all the games I've played this year, um, I don't I can only think of one game that's like a full priced AAA came out this year. Like it was a big game for me.
Yeah,
And I think that was Dragon's Dogma 2. And that game, even then, I only um paid like £35 for it on CD keys before it came out. I'm just scrolling through the list of games here that I've sort of played recently. Yeah, like so far, all the games I've played have either been cheaper indie games, got deep on sale, or we've got a code, so I haven't needed to sort of actually buy it myself, right? Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown was one actually that I did
sure.
sort of pay that full price for. But other than that, it's all been sort of like smaller, quicker, cheaper things. I do think that you can get a lot more mileage out of it. But the flip side of that is you can also then get in the habit of just going, oh yeah, I've had a period here where I smashed through 4 games in like this month. They were quite cheap, they were quite quick. Cool. I'm just going to buy everything on sale that I want to get. And now I'm looking at the backlog list on GG, the backlog list I've made on Steam, and then just looking through like my recent Steam purchases, and I'm like, uh oh, this is like an insurmountable amount of games here. Like I've bought things on early access that I've not played enough of. Hades 2 I haven't played enough of yet. Ender Magnolia I bought because it was cheaper in early access. I don't know if I'm going to get around to it until 1.0 launches.
Yeah.
Um, there's just a lot on here that I'm like, oh, maybe I haven't quite done.
Yeah.
Maybe
And
I've made a mistake here.
And I mean, like, that's the thing, right? Is like Link said here, right? Like, my biggest problem is I keep adding new games, so
Hmm.
it keeps growing rather than shrinking. And I think part of it is definitely like just being comfortable with that too, right? Is
Oh
that
yeah.
like accepting that you know uh in this life, if you're somebody who has a pretty broad palette, right? Like you're never going to realistically be able to try every game that you want to try. Or
Hmm.
even if you do, right? Like there's stuff you're going to, you're not going to get to do every single piece of content in that game or whatever, right? And I think part of it is, you know, um, not buying those games on impulse, right? Like not
Hmm.
buying a game when you're not ready to play it, I think is a good piece of advice. And I think the other thing is, um, taking a look at your backlog and trying to understand, like, what's on it and why, right? Like, you mentioned, like, that white whale game, right? Like, for me with Baldur's Gate, that is a game that's in a style that I really like, in a genre I really like, with a lot of trappings of things that I look for in those kinds of games that isn't represented in other places, right? So for like as a fan of that genre, it feels like I'm kind of doing myself a disservice if I don't get around to playing that game, right? Which is why it stayed
Yeah.
on my backlog, and why even if I don't play it for 3 years, it'll be on my backlog, right?
Yeah. That's why Armored Core like, so when I beat, uh the Elden Ring DLC, and I was like, "Cool, I don't want to play another game of Elden Ring, like, start again, I'll do Dark Souls." I beat Dark Souls, and I then ended up installing Dark Souls 2, Armored Core, Neo, and The Surge 2 all at once. I installed them all, and I was like, "Which one's gonna grab me?" And I started all of them, and again, I looked up how long these games actually were, and I thought, right, Dark Souls 2 is like 40 hours. Let's sort of skip that one. Neo, I started playing and didn't quite grab me just yet. I'll probably go back to it another time. But yeah, Armored Core did grab me. So I'm like, right, everything else can sort of go back into the backlog. That can sort of
Yes.
sit while I focus on this. And I also know I've got a 2 week holiday coming up. So I'm like, right, I'm gonna sort of take some games away with me there, and I'll take my Steam Deck and I'll play some things there as well. Um, so I know that these things that I'm getting and want to play aren't just going to disappear if I don't want to play them. They're going to be there waiting for me when I'm ready for them. And sometimes all it
Right.
takes is one game to drag me back in, or like I play Elden Ring and all of a sudden I'm like, right, Souls likes or action combat. Let's do that. Or
Totally.
sometimes I'll play a Metroidvania that gets me so much. So I'm like, cool, let's just quickly blast through my backlog of Metroidvanias. Let's do sort of three in a row. You
I
get
think
into the
that's
swing
what
of it.
I think that's what I had with Fallout, where like I was similar to you this year, where the only like big AAA game that I started was Final Fantasy, and it just didn't grab me the way that the first one did. And like maybe that's one I'll circle back to at some point, maybe not. Who knows? That happens to me sometimes. That happened with God of War the first time. It was like I
Hmm.
started playing it like right as I started dating my wife, and I was like, "Hey, this game's great," but I mean, I'm not playing it like I want to. So like I'm just gonna put it away for now, right? And that was how I felt with Final Fantasy, where I'm like, I'm not enjoying this, but I'm not itching to play it. So
Yeah.
why bother?
Yeah.
And I think, Fallout felt like kind of a slump buster for me with that, where I was like, oh, I like got back into a big meaty thing, and then I was in the mood for another big meaty thing.
Yes, yeah, I have. There are periods of time, sometimes around Christmas, sometimes in the summer, where I'm just like not in the mood to play anything, and that's when Near Replicant got caught up in it. That's when after I beat Balatro, I took a break where I was just like, nothing's really grabbing me, and it's fine to take a break. But there's always something that I'm either waiting for to bring back in, or sometimes it just happens. For me, last year I didn't play anything at all until Metroid Prime Remaster came out, and then I played every Metroid game, and then we saw at the end of the year last year where I was like, I have too many games to fit on this top 10 list. I've got 15 games that came out this year alone. I played like 33 games in total looking at this.
Yeah.
Um, and because all it takes is, one little, you know, one pebble that then turns into an avalanche. And all of a sudden I'm playing everything, and some of them are quite quick. And I sort of spent the end of last year as well mopping up. You get more time indoors. It's not nice. You're not going out. There's not events on. So I was able to play through like Alan
That's
Wake
been
later than I
helping
wanted
this
to do.
summer for
And
us too. It's like it's so hot,
yeah,
right? It's like it's easy to stay inside and play a video game all day.
yeah, aircon on or whatever, like last year, a lot of my top games of last year, and like, whether this comes down to recency bias or which I don't think it is, I just think it's like I happened to get to those games at that time. Lies of P, Alan Wake 2, Jedi Survivor, and Cocoon are all games that were in like my top six. Resident Evil 4 as well, top six, top seven games, I'm pretty sure. And all of those games I played in the last few months because I was like, oh yeah, I wanted to play Lies of P, and then I completely forgot about that game when it came out. Played it, I was like, yeah, cool, second best game of the year, great. Um, Alan Wake 2 was something I didn't even know I was going to get until it came on sale, and I was like, "Yeah, all right." And then I played it again in my top three. Jedi Survivor I picked up when it came out, and then just didn't touch it. Didn't touch anything. Didn't play anything for a little while, and then I was like, "Oh, I've just installed my PC like at my new home when I moved. What am I going to play? Oh, Jedi Survivor's installed. I'll give that a go." Bang! I just played that for 40 hours. Sometimes all it takes is just that one, that one game.
Slump buster.
Yeah.
So I want to
And
jump
I
in.
oh, go on, go.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was gonna say, I know that's gonna happen towards the end of this year when, when we get to sort of September, October time, I know I'm gonna be like, "Oh, yeah, cool, these games that came out." Luckily, I've been on top of it a lot this year because we've had things coming out for review and things like that. But there are a couple of games coming out that I'm like, I'm not gonna get them on launch, but I will get to them by the end of the year.
That always happens to me too, is like, I know like near the end of the year, we always are like, oh, like what are the games that you didn't get to that you want to play before it's time to
Mhm.
name game of the year? And that'll often influence my backlog as well. Is if like, okay, I thought I wanted to play this game. I never made time for it during the year. Is this one I need to make time for next year? Or should I just accept that I'm not playing this game anytime soon or maybe ever?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna do the same with Baldur's Gate 3 soon. I might just have to uninstall it right now on the show, live, but, we'll see.
We'll see. So I want to get into some of your strategies, dear listeners. But before we do that, let me remind you that this episode of the FlipScreen Games Podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of July. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valens, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Asobi, Snackago, Steve Stompy, Susan Likes Cats and Also Boobies, Voodoo Vic, Ty the Dude, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/FlipScreen Games. You all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. If you want to go check out our sister shows, Nintendo Noise and the Steam Deck podcast, or you want to write into the show just like everyone did for this week's grab bag episode for the question block, you can do all that and much more by heading over to FlipScreen.Games. That's our website where you will find all the places we are all over the web. However you choose to get involved or show your support, we thank you for tuning in to another episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast. So, Space Channel 5 wrote in and said, my strategy is don't die before completing the backlog.
I I've genuinely every single year Metro Prime 4 doesn't come out, I'm like, please don't die. Please don't have like a horrible accident.
I got to make it.
Yeah, like I've had times where I'm like really like I've been like really drunk and I'm like, don't do anything stupid because Metro Prime 4 is not out yet. You need to see this through, you know. Obviously there's other very important things I need to do as well, like, you know,
But that's number one.
my girlfriend at my house. But Metro Prime, I've been waiting for this for so long, you know. That's the original. It's been there for so long.
I was invested in this well before I had a girlfriend or a house.
Yeah. Before I'd ever had a girlfriend, I was waiting for Metro Prime 4.
So this next is I thought this was interesting. We have two responses from Andrew Valentine, loyal listener,
Is
and the
that
first
allowed?
one I'm gonna allow it. The first one was
Mm.
like when the question got asked, and then last week when I was like, hey, we're gonna talk about this next week. If you have any thoughts or strategies, write in. Andrew like opened the floodgates and had some real strategies just
He'd
seemed
been
to throw out.
ruminating. He had
Yeah,
been ruminating
had
on
some
it.
time to think about it. So, basically, the first one was for me. There's no magic app, spreadsheet, or service that solves the backlog. It's just patience and discipline. At the start of the year, I make a list of what I want to play, made up of games from my backlog, and schedule new releases, and then I just play them one at a time. It's also been helpful to accept that I can't play everything, and that's fine. And I
You're a
think,
madman. You're a
you know,
madman. You're the kind of person that sits and just like stares at the back of the seat when you're on a plane journey. How do you just make that list and stick to it? How does nothing come out surprising you? Take you. To be fair, whenever I see Andrew's finished a game, it's like an old banger, not like a shit car, like an old great game. And I'm always there for it. Whenever I see him play a game, I'm like, yeah, that's a good game. I'm glad you finally got round to it. And every time it's like a first play for him as well. It's nice to see people playing good games. You know.
yeah, and Andrew like kind of breaks down the strategy a little bit more and like what goes into it. And I thought there was some helpful stuff here because I think that in a perfect world, the system Andrew describes there is the way to go about it, right? Set clear goals for yourself and stick with them, and don't buy new games. That's the best way to start tackling this thing. So here's the more in-depth thoughts. And Andrew said, you asked for feedback on how listeners deal with their backlogs. Sorry for the brain dump that follows. Disclaimer, this is just what I do. That works for me. I hope this doesn't come across as me mansplaining some kind of ultimate foolproof strategy. I just thought it may be useful to explain how I approach my backlog and provide some examples of how I think it's helped. So the first strategy is set targets. This was prompted by the Your Year in Nintendo email I got at the end of 2022. It showed how few games I'd played and how little I played them. I was so shocked to see how little time I actually spent on my hobby that I resolved myself to set a target for 2023. I made a list of games I wanted to play and set myself the goal of finishing at least 10 of them over the course of the year, tracking completions on Twitter. Within that list, I also resolved to finish games from genres I'm less familiar with. That felt monumental at the time, but achievable. That list was just in the Notes app on my iPhone, no complex color-coded spreadsheet required. I ended up beating 23 games, in 2023, meaning I played and finished more games that year than in any previous one. Setting that goal and holding myself accountable to it was a great help and felt something like a success. And then for 2024, inspired by it being the final full year of the Switch being Nintendo's primary console, I set myself the following goals. Beat the classic indies that I never finished because I was intimidated by their reputation. Beat first-party Nintendo games I've never played just because they're not 3D Mario or Zelda, my gaming crutch. Beat 5 games released in 2024 over the course of the year. Roll credits on a roguelike. With the first, I've played through Hollow Knight, Cuphead, Hyper Light Drifter, and Celeste. The latter now being one of my favorite games ever. Great
Good
answer
choice.
there. Yeah, Celeste is a banger. With the second, well, I haven't really got to that yet, but I fully intend to finish Pikmin 4 and Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze before the end of the year. I've completed the third and fourth goals and have just finished my 24th game of the year. Yes, all I'm really talking about here is gamifying gaming. For my smooth monkey brain, it works. I like
I mean,
this
that does
though.
work.
I
Yeah, I
thought
do
that
too.
was really cool.
I'm looking at Andrew's list as we speak, and he's done exactly that. He's picked up some old indies that he might have sort of not wanted to do before. Hollow Knight, again, that's another one with a reputation that's almost deified as well.
Sure.
Retro Prime Remastered, that's a Nintendo first party game he's not played, so that's you have done some of that. And yeah, there's he's done it, and it's obviously working for him. If he's beaten more games this year than he's ever beaten in a year before, and it's only July, this method must work.
And, Link, who wrote in with the original question, responded and said, "Oh, I really like the idea of setting goals like that, almost like achievements. I think maybe I'll try this once I'm done playing catch up with the years where I wasn't an active gamer, which is one of the reasons for my own substantial backlog." Which that is tough. That is tough if you had a period where you're breaking and you're trying to catch up on everything that you've missed. Then that's
Yes.
that's going to be an uphill battle for
Qu
sure.
Quickly, my personal one on that is I played the Wii, up until I stopped playing video games just before, uh, Skyward Sword came out, and I had just turned 18, so I was busy doing other things at that point. I was allowed to drink, so I was out, I was
Sure.
socializing. And then 2014 I came back, bought a Wii U, and I just missed I'd also missed previous generations. I didn't own a PS3 or an Xbox, so I have every now and again I'll just be like, oh, what's like a banger from like previous gens I haven't played before, and that's where you end up playing things like Tomb Raider, or you end up playing things like catching up on all the Dark Souls games because I never had a system that really played them before. Um, and like they were just gaps, big gaps that I was able to fill because I'd had a break.
I went through a very similar thing during the Xbox 360 generation where not that I like ever had a period where I totally stopped playing games, but it was just like ebbs and flows, and I had a period where I wasn't really playing single player stuff at all. And I was really only playing multiplayer games with my buddies. And it wasn't until I played Batman Arkham Asylum was the kind of the slump buster, and right after that I played Dragon Age Origins, one of my favorite games of all time. That kind of got me back into the more like big prestige single player experience. And then literally I just was like, all right, what have I not played? Like, what are the classics of this generation
Mhm.
I missed? And I played BioShock, Assassin's Creed, the Ezio trilogy. Like, I kind of just was like, what are the big games everybody says were the best this time around? Let me get into them and start chipping away at them. And yeah, that worked for me really well. And especially at that time where I wasn't like, very like I was looking at new releases, but I wasn't slavish about new releases, right? It was easy to just be like, great, I'll jump into this thing because it seems interesting. I'm in the mood for
Yeah.
something like this at the time. And then this is the second rule that I think is an important one, right? Which is this is a simpler one. If a game I want is on sale, I just don't buy it anymore and add it to the endless backlog. I ask myself how likely I am to play it, and if I am, when I'm going to play it. I found that being more deliberate with purchases has resulted in me actually playing those games. This all sounds very dry reading it back, so I should definitely point out that I try to stay flexible with what I play. For example, I've just finished one game, and I'm currently waiting on the release of Bow Path of the Teal Lotus on the 18th. So in this in between games period, I'm mostly playing around with some of the things on Nintendo Switch Online. So
I completely forgot to ask for a review code for Boat. Oh, no. It's too late. Oh, well. I'll get to it eventually.
you'll get to it. So I think that's the other part of it, right? Is that there is that element of self control, right? Which is that at some point you need to say enough's enough. I got too much stuff on the backlog, or you need to be comfortable with letting go of some of the older games, maybe as you add new ones, right? Because
Yes.
you know, there's just more games that come out than we can keep up with these days, and obviously this year has been a bit of a slower release schedule than I think we've been used to, and there's a good chance that that may continue in the years to come, and that we will see kind of a smaller volume of games, just because of the way that the market is right now.
Mhm.
So, I think taking advantage of those gaps in your calendar, and really prioritizing the games that you feel are important to get to, is definitely the way to go about it. And
Yeah.
like, not I think something that this is particularly a thing for Americans, but I think it's true of pretty much all Western culture, right? Whereas I think the way that we all work and the way that how oriented our lives are around work, I think sometimes we get in that mindset of like spending money on your hobby is the same thing as spending time on your hobby, and it just isn't,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
You can always wait for that game to go on sale again, right? And you can always, you know, find time or again, right? Like I think if you stop buying games on sale that you never play, it'll hurt less when you buy a game at full price when you actually want to play it, right?
I'm taking this all really personally, Pete, just so you're aware. This feels like you're talking directly to my soul, and I don't like it because I
Just
feel
trying to help
very
out.
seen. I
Just
feel
trying to help
really
out,
seen.
you know? Andrew is just trying to impart some wisdom here, and I think he's
It
onto
is
something.
wisdom. Yeah, yeah,
It
I
is.
think that is a good way of looking at it, and
You gotta accept
I'm
the
not
things that
gonna
you can change and let go of the things that you
yeah,
can't.
I'm not gonna fundamentally change who I am as a person, but I might also, like, at the start of the year be like, "Right, I wanna play this," but sometimes the mood just strikes, you know? Sometimes something comes out you're not aware is gonna come out, and then it just sets you off on a different path. However, I do want to finish on, I wanna ask the people, and you too, why not?
Sure.
What are games that you have had in your backlog for so long that you've just given up on? You know it's never gonna happen. We mentioned Hi-Fi Rush earlier, and, you're kidding yourself that it's gonna happen one day. What have you got any of those?
It's a great I mean, I know I do. I think that's a great question. I wanna pull up my Steam library and take a
Sure,
look real
I
quick.
can go for a bit then. I mean,
Yeah,
Hi-Fi Rush is
you got
obviously
some
one
in
of
mind?
them. I'm so close to getting rid of Baldur's Gate 3, as I said earlier. There's a few indie games that I'm just like, "Oh, yeah, I really need to sort of go back to that." Unsighted is one that have bought twice and keep meaning to go back to. Um, Final Fantasy 12 is a game that I've bought on, like, PS4, uh, Switch, and PC, and have just never been able to make an dent in it because every time I'm like, "Oh, I'm not that bothered about it," a Xenoblade game comes out, I play that, and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I should play Final Fantasy 12." Luckily, it seems like there's no more Xenoblade games, so that might be one that I end up losing off my backlog. It's also my brother's favorite game of all time, so we talk about it often, you know?
Sure.
Slay the Spire is another one that even though I know in my heart of hearts, in the heart of the cards, I would love Slay the Spire as I like deck builders, I like roguelikes, yada, yada, yada. I just don't think I'm ever gonna play that one, so I might give up on that one too.
So, yeah, I've got a few that are coming up as I'm going through of, like, games that, like, I've told myself I'd like to get into. Alan Wake is one. Like, that's one that I've always talked about going back to. When 2 came out, I wanted to get to it, but I also just know that I'm not that into horror. So it's like,
Mhm.
you know, similar, I think, is Resident Evil 2 remake. That was one that I started in 2020, and I was enjoying it quite a bit, but it ended up just being hitting a little too close to home for what was going on at the
Yeah.
time. And I just was like, I don't, I get it, like, and I think that's something that I was driving to when we were talking about Hi-Fi Rush is like sometimes there are games where you play it and you get a taste and you're like, cool, like I get it, but I don't feel super motivated to keep going here because like I kind of feel
Yeah.
like I've gotten my fill. Um, I feel that way about basically every From Software game. Whereas,
Yeah.
I've told myself, I should try it again. I should go in with this mentality. I should play with some, whatever. And it's never what I want to be doing.
I just thought of 2 more in that vein.
Okay.
The Witcher 3.
Yes. That is a great one for me. I have started that
That's
game
been one of
4
ours
times. I
that's been one of
should like
ours
it, but I don't.
yeah. That is a game that's come up regularly for all of us, I'm pretty sure, since we started doing loot pots. It was just coming out on Switch at the time. Pixelpal was saying like, "You need to play it." We were like, "Nah, it's not for us." And I still have never. I've started it so many times. The other one for me is Horizon Zero Dawn, another one that I bought on PS4,
Yeah.
started on PS5, and sorry, bought it on PS4 to play on PS5, and bought on Steam, and have just never. It's never grabbed me. I've tried so hard, it's just never grabbed me. And yet I'll do it again, I'm sure.
And maybe that'll be the third time's the charm.
Maybe it will be.
I kind of feel that way about Hellblade at this point, where I'm like,
The first one?
yeah, because I've still not played it. Now there's the second one, and I still haven't played that. And I'm just like, am I really gonna get
Yeah.
through the first one to get to the second one? If I finish it's just like I don't know.
I've already dropped the second one. I just at no point if it's one of those ones where immediately I was like, "Oh, I don't want to play this. This is so boring." And that's probably a me problem. But I just can't do it. Oh, Helldivers 2 is one that I've just uninstalled this today as well. Just because I was like, I got it during the hype. I I played a few games with my pals. As soon as I went to play that by myself, I was like, "Ugh, I don't like this." And as soon as I then, tried to do it with anyone really, I was
That
just like waiting for the game to be over, and I was like, this isn't doing it for me, you know?
that was one I was glad I didn't bite on because I figured I would do that, and I kind of resisted the FOMO, and let myself, just, not worry about
Yeah.
it.
Whereas I'm very, very susceptible to FOMO. But
Oh, it
sometimes it
happens.
works out for the best.
It happens.
Sometimes you end up finding a game series you didn't know you liked. Like I didn't touch a Dark Souls game. I was always like, Souls likes. I don't think so. Now, like one of my favorite genres, I've played all the games multiple times. I've, played Sekiro through 3 times, or Bloodborne through twice, Dark Souls through twice, Elden Ring through 3 times. Um, and you don't know until you try it, and you can avoid hype as much as you want sometimes, but sometimes the hype's there for a reason, yeah.
Yeah. And that's always, I think, the thing that, like, you know, um keeps me wanting to go back to them is, like, feeling like maybe this will be the time, right? Because it
Mhm.
happens, right? Like, it happened to me with Fallout, right? Like, that was a game I put 20 hours into and was like, "Cool, I get it." And then, you know, the mood struck, and it was worth going back to at that time. So,
Yeah.
I always try to keep my mind open to going back, but, um, here's another good one for me, and maybe this will be my last one, which is, Knights of the Old Republic. So,
Yeah.
I love BioWare, right? Like, I've talked about Dragon Age, Mass Effect, and, like, how much I love those games, and this is a game that has been on my backlog basically since it was contemporary. One of my very good friends growing up was a big fan of it, loaned me a copy. I had it for years and just never started it, and I finally started it when it was a couple years old, and I was enjoying it, but a new game came out, pulled my attention away. The next time I tried to go back to it, it felt very dated, but I was like, "Hey, I wanna give this a shot. I wanna get through it." And I just never did. And now I feel like it's just at that point where it's like, this game's like 30 years old, It's like,
Yeah.
I just don't it's not gonna hit the way that it would if I had played it when it was contemporary. And, I think my best bet at this point is hoping for a remake at some point.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was announced and cancelled, wasn't it? Or announced and sort of scrapped. I tried to play that a couple of years ago, with a friend. We both said we were playing it at the same time, and I think I got a chunk into the first planet, and I just texted her and I was like, "I can't do this anymore. I cannot do this anymore. This is just not I'm not having fun." They were like, "Yeah, same." So we just both scrapped it at the same time. We are like, "Yeah, cool. I
Yeah.
don't feel guilty. I was only playing it so that I didn't, like, ditch them." Um so yeah, that's one of those ones that I don't even know if a remake's gonna get me, personally.
All right, let me ask you one more question, and if you don't have an
Go
answer
for it.
right from the hip, you can save it for next week. What is the oldest game on your backlog that you definitely still want to play? Because I think the
Uh,
answer for me is gotta be Earthbound, or
yeah, that's on there.
that's
That
gotta
is
be it.
on there. But I think, one that I've actively intended on playing many times is Legacy of Kain Defiance.
Okay.
It's even when I was a kid, it's been on my backlog since I was a kid
Yeah,
of, like, played
same.
all the other games. Oh, yeah, and then 2022, whichever year I got my Steam Deck came out, I played every Legacy of Kain game, got up to playing Defiance, and then just stopped, and I've never, like, worked up the courage to go back and remember that because it's quite a complicated story, and I was like, "Right, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna play all the games," and I got all the way up to Defiance and didn't play it. I'm looking at it right now here as a game to play. So that is I think what's that, 2004 maybe,
Okay.
2006? Yeah, that's obviously not as old as Earthbound, but,
No,
I'm
but
also not a
that's a good
big
answer.
turn-based guy. So,
Yeah, totally. My
yeah.
other my other, like, very old classic game that I still always tell myself I'm gonna get to eventually is Chrono Trigger, but
Yeah. Yeah, there's, like, there are a lot of, like, PS1 games that I'm like people talk about it in a very positive light of like, "Oh, this was amazing." Final Fantasy VII, for example, but I know if I went back to play something like that now, without the sort of like the modern you know, uh,
quality of
quality
life.
of life stuff that we expect that you sometimes also get in these remakes. I just know, like some of the Mega Man games, I played a lot of them hard straight up on an NES emulator without any, stuff. But when I played the Legacy Collection, I was like, oh, this actually is like not a lot of fun unless you can do the whole pausing. And there's a remake of Metroid 1 on the NES that someone made, a fan made remake, not Zero Mission, that basically takes the NES game exactly as it is, gives you a map and means so that when you die, you don't start at like 30 HP and have to go and um, farm to get your XP back. It keeps you at the maximum level. That made that game so playable that I beat it in like 2 hours, and
Yeah.
that was the first time I'd ever beaten Metroid, the original Metroid, before, because I'd always got to the point I'm just like, this isn't fun. I'm not going to cheat my way through it. So like, just adding something like that makes it infinitely more playable.
Yeah, totally. And I think for a lot of those games, like you have to think like sometimes the difficulty was done in such a way to make the game take longer, right? So like there are some of those things where it's like, yeah, I mean, like, this little change makes it infinitely more playable by modern standards. And
Yes.
that's what you're hoping for with something like Chrono Trigger, because there was like that great DS port, which is like everyone says is the best way to play it, and it's like $100 to buy a cart now.
Yeah.
And it's like I would love for them to port a good version of that game to a modern console, because every time I tried to play it, it was like on my PS Vita, and it was the PlayStation port, which is notoriously the worst version of it, and it has
Yeah.
like really long load times every time you pause the menu or every time you get in a battle, and I was like, absolutely not, I can't put up with
Caveats.
this, you know?
Too many caveats. Whereas I think the Steam Deck does sometimes just make it like so easy just to pick up an old game. Like, I've played so many old games. Like, I played
Totally.
all the Legacy of Kain games. Some of them were on Steam, some of them weren't on Steam, but it just made it so easy
I
to do. Like,
replayed like all the Tony Hawk games, which was such a blast.
yeah, there we go.
Yeah, with the original soundtracks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely, I guess the last bit of advice I'd get is consider getting a Steam Deck, because it's
Yeah.
really good for backlogs.
Really good.
So that's our advice for you on backlogs. I hope it was helpful, everybody. Thank you so much to Link for writing in. This is a really great thought provoking question. We have a ton of questions in the question block from all of you that we'll definitely keep jumping into in the weeks to come, as long as there's not a big news story. So if you guys want to write in with a main topic, or just like a fun little icebreaker question, please do. And we're holding on to them if we don't get to them. Trust me. So we will get to it eventually. So thank you again, Link, for writing in. Thank you to everybody who wrote in with their backlog strategies. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. If you want to let us know what your backlog strategies are, or if you are going to try any of these backlog strategies to get through your backlog in 2024 and beyond, make sure you write in all the ways that you can by heading over to FlipScreen Games. That's the website where you will find all the places we are, our sister shows, our Patreon, however you choose to get involved or show your support. Thank you for being a member of the community and tuning into this week's episode of the Flip Screen Games Podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Max. We'll see you next week.
Bye.